الحمد لله وكفى والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنهم فتية آمنوا بربهم فزدناهم هدى سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in Surah Kahf a group of youth who believed in Him. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala subsequently increased them in guidance. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, Holy Quran, describes a group of youth who believed in Him. So as a result, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states that He increased them in guidance. One of the unique things about this particular group of individuals, and there's a debate whether there were 3, whether they were 4, whether they were 5, and the Quran actually goes through the discussion of how many there really were and whether anyone really knows how many there were. But one of the unique things about this group of individuals is that despite their environment, which was that of people who denied Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they stood up and they proclaimed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as their Lord. And so based on their minimal effort, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted them increased guidance. From this particular ayah, the Mufassirin, they highlight that actually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's tawajjuh, His attention, His mercy, His barakat, His guidance, it's always focused on a group of people that seek to please Him, no matter how many they are in number. They can be few, they can be many. And so, from this particular example, one of the things that our mashayikh point out is that our focus shouldn't be on what goes on around us, but instead our focus should be on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, that sounds very straightforward, but actually it's a very deep point, because often we get caught up in the things that go on around us. We say, well, such and such events are occurring, and we say the Muslims are doing such and so, and the non-Muslims are doing such and so, and we get very caught up in what the people around us are doing. But actually, the secret to attaining the tawajjuh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to actually direct ourselves to Allah. And when we direct ourselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then He subsequently guides that group of people that aim their focus on Him. So, in the path of tasawwuf, focusing on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala results in progress of a student. And actually, our progress is defined by 4 individual journeys. And I've talked about these before. These are called the suyur al-arba', 4 individual journeys. These 4 individual journeys are, each student has to undertake them. And the result is something called the ma'iyah with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the very first journey that a student undertakes is sayr ilallah. Okay, so the first thing that a student undertakes is sayr. It's called sayr. Sayr means journey, ilallah, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now what that basically means is that a person recognizes that everything around them is not where their attention should be, but instead they should be focusing on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Similar to that group of individuals that I described in that ayah, the people of the cave. So what happens in this particular state is that there's 2 possibilities. Either somebody was completely heedless of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they didn't think about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they were just spending their life the way they wanted to spend it, and they change their focus to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that a person understood that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the goal of my life, that Islam is the goal of my life, that the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is the goal of my life, but they were dispersed within that. They were worried about organizations, they were worried about getting this job A and then job B and then job C done, and they weren't focused on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you find both of these people in the community. You find a group of people who say, well, I was completely heedless, and then all of a sudden I recognized that I needed to, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me the tawfiq to focus on Him, and so therefore I'm on this path. And you find another group of people that say, well, I tried so many different things, I wasn't developing myself, so eventually I ended up on this path. Irrespective, that's the first stage of the path. that a person makes a decision, a conscious decision, with the tawfiq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they are going to focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's called sayr ila Allah. Then the next stage is called sayr fillah. Sayr means journey. Fillah means within Allah in a way. Meaning it's sayr in the fana of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning a student now, once they recognize that they need to turn towards Allah, they make some adjustments that in order to make their life appropriate for turning to Allah, and then they spend the time in which they are very, very deep in their remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning they're actively making effort. Okay, what does that active effort entail? It entails the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first and foremost. Now, we've talked about this so many times, the different things that are necessary for progress, the recitation of the Quran, making istighfar, making salawat, and the dhikr, etc. And the dhikr is essential in this particular stage. And this is the stage where all of us are in, basically. This very, very initial stage of the second journey. And in this particular stage, the dhikr is one of the most important things that we have to keep in mind. The more dhikr that we make, the faster we progress through this stage, and the deeper we progress into this stage. And so it's very, very important that we have a regular, scheduled amount of dhikr that we do. Now by dhikr we mean a couple of things. One, recitation of the Quran, and that's obvious, we've discussed that. And then two, and of course I'm not talking about the fara'id are mandatory. So I'm talking about the nawafil that we use in order to attain and attract Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attention. So 1, the Quran, 2, istighfar, 3, salawat, and 4, muraqabah. And then 5, wuquf. Muraqabah and wuquf. Wuquf means 24 hours constantly tying everything into Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, focusing one's heart towards Allah. And then muraqabah means sitting down for 15, 20, 30, 45 minutes and spending time on the individual lesson that you're on. Now, the key to all of this dhikr is the muraqabah. The muraqabah is is really the power and the gist of our tariqah. And when we sit in muraqabah, we attract Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attention, and that becomes the fuel by which everything else becomes empowered. This and rabita, which we're going to talk about in a second. But the muraqabah is essential. And it has to be done daily. And it has to be made an established habit in our lives, and it should be done at a set time so that we defend that particular deed. Now, when we talk about muraqabah, basically there's a couple of things you should recognize. And some people have confusion about this, so I just want to discuss it because I've gotten some emails about it recently, and it should just be clarified. When you're doing muraqabah, all you're basically doing is clearing your mind. So you sit down, you clear your mind completely, as much as you can, of any external thoughts. And then you imagine that your heart is calling the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and that you're simply listening. So you're basically just sitting, usually cross-legged if that's the most convenient way for you. Alright? And then you just remain quiet. It's actually it's like a waiting. So you sit there, you're quietly waiting, and you just have your ear focused on your heart. And you're imagining that you're listening to the name of Allah come from your heart. That's basically the muraqabah. Now, people, they feel that there should be something more because it seems so simplistic, and so they want to do other things. There's no movement, okay? There's absolutely no movement involved. And there is nothing from the tongue. It's totally silent. You're just reflecting. Now, a person who's in muraqabah will have one of 3 states. A person who sits down in muraqabah will have one of 3 states. Number 1, either they'll be totally focused on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is the cream of muraqabah. And that is rare, but it occurs on occasion. Okay, so it's not something that always is happening, but it occurs on occasion, and it is sort of the cream of the muraqabah, and it's the goal of the muraqabah. When it occurs, it's Allah's blessing, and when He withholds it, it's also Allah's will. Now, that's the first state, that you just sit down, you're reflecting, and you just are totally caught up in the remembrance of Allah. You're imagining your heart saying the name of Allah. The second state is that it's totally empty. Your mind is clear, you're not thinking about anything, but you're just sitting there and nothing's really happening. That's also part of muraqabah. That's part of the waiting. So if you're in that state, then what you should be trying to do is trying to focus yourself further on the remembrance of Allah. Imagining that your heart is saying Allah. That's the second state. The third state is that you're thinking about something else. So you're in muraqabah and you're thinking about football. Okay? Or you're in muraqabah and you're thinking about your chemistry test. Now, that state is also important. People say, well, that's the state that I should be in. Actually, that state is also important because that state highlights to us what our competitors are. Meaning, you can state it another way. At that time when we sit down to do muraqabah, and we're supposed to be focused on Allah, what are the things that come in our mind? Those are the things that compete in our remembrance of Allah. So if every time you sit down in muraqabah you're thinking about football, that means that you might have to make a decision to cut out football from your life. Because it's competing with you when you're trying to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why it's stated that even the heedlessness that exists in muraqabah is to be noted because there lies benefit in noting it. So these are the three states that can occur during muraqabah. Now, the more you do it, the deeper it will be. And if you don't do it for a minimum period of time, you can never expect to develop depth. Minimum period of time, 15 minutes. But for anybody who's serious, half an hour. And if you're really seeking to achieve your state in this journey, then an hour. That should be considered standard. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, these are what we tell people in the very, very beginning, when they're getting used to it. So if it's not done, you're not going to be able to receive the benefit of it. So it's very important that it be established as part of the daily routine. Now that can be cut up. You can do 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes. Or it can be continuous. You can do a straight hour. 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes, that's fine. But the depth lies in the straight hour. The depth lies in the straight hour. Because the first 10 minutes you're just focusing yourself. And then if you want to get deep, if your first 10 minutes you're focusing yourself, then 10 minutes you're doing muraqabah, then you stop, and then 10 minutes you do it in the afternoon, and 10 minutes you're focusing yourself, 10 minutes you're doing muraqabah. You can obviously see that doesn't compare to focusing yourself in 10 minutes and then 50 minutes of very, very hardcore muraqabah. So that's the other thing to keep in mind. The third thing to keep in mind is that you can do it any place, any time. So you might be driving, you can do it. Right? You might be at home, you can do it. You might be lying down in your bed, lying down before you go to bed, you can do it. Any single time that you can find to do it, you can do it. But the best time is when you're totally focused. And ideally, you should do it in the masjid if you can. For brothers, you should do it in the masjid. For sisters, you should have a musalla in your house, obviously, where you pray. That's the best place to do it. Now, if you do it in the masjid, then you combine nur upon nur. Number one, for example, if you come before the Maghrib prayer, you come before the Isha prayer, and you sit in muraqabah. Number one, you're waiting for the prayer, so that's a barakah, right? Number two, you're sitting in muraqabah, that's a barakah. Number three, you're sitting in the masjid, that's a barakah. And number four, you'll see that if you do that, your prayer will improve significantly, and that will be a barakah. Because you'll have already been sitting for 1 hour, half an hour in dhikr, and then you go into the prayer then improves significantly. Because you already have been sitting in the remembrance of Allah, and the prayer is just an extension of that. And in fact, that's the goal. Right, the goal of the muraqabah in and of itself is not a goal. The muraqabah's goal is that it increase your depth in your acts of ibadah. Now, so actually there are many things that are involved in progress along this path and in this journey. But there were two things that I wanted to touch upon. So anyway, the first, and I'll cover the second in a second. The first point is that the journeys are four. The first journey is to Allah, in which an individual recognizes that they need to turn their attention to Allah. The second is within Allah, in which an individual increases their depth of dhikr. The third is from Allah, okay, min Allah, in which an individual they took a period of time in which they developed their depth in their dhikr, and they took a period of time in which they developed themselves, and that period of time, obviously they weren't interacting with the community as much. But then eventually they begin to move away from that stage. And they begin to interact with the community more, and they decrease their amount of time in which they, quote-unquote, retain for individual acts of worship. And then eventually the final stage is ma'allah, in which an individual interacts within the community like a normal person, but their heart is completely connected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's the final goal. And that's called ma'iyah, in which an individual looks normal. Now you look at the prophets, alayhim salam, or you look at people who are very, very righteous, when they finish this journey, when they walk around, they look like a normal person. But they're constantly in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's the goal for each individual. Okay, so the two things that I wanted to touch upon that are essential in this journey. that when I spent these last few days with Shaykh Zulfiqar, he particularly emphasized on several occasions where number one, dhikr. Dhikr is the fuel of the journey. Okay? Dhikr is the fuel that takes you through this whole journey. And so if you're serious, right, if you're serious about attaining the end of reaching the end of the journey, reaching the end of this travel, then it's essential that you put time into dhikr. And what I mean by dhikr here is muraqabah. So half an hour minimum for students who are now, whatever, more than a month, more than 2 months. And then if you're serious, then an hour. Every day there should be an hour of our day where we spend in the dhikr of Allah, in muraqabah, because that's actually the gist, that's the core. That's number one. And number two is that there needs to be a rabita. Now, what I mean by rabita is that you need to stay in touch and update concerning how much muraqabah you're doing, what your a'mal are, and what your states are. And that's essential on the path as well. Because the path is not being traveled alone, you're being guided along the path. And if you're not openly communicating, there's no way anyone's going to be able to read your mind and say, okay, this is what's going on. Now, for example, when Shaykh Zulfiqar was here in the past few days, I had a couple meetings with him where I go through and I say, okay, this person is doing this person's doing this person is planning on doing this person has been doing this person has been doing muraqabah for this much. And those are the people that I can update. Whoever's been updating me, those are the people I can update on. And then the rest of the people I was just silent about. And then he gave specific instructions for those people that I was able to update on. Now, I recognize that everybody's not able to get time to sit with him and spend half an hour explaining their state. But if you're regularly in touch, then at least it gives me the opportunity to say to him, look, this is where person A is, this is where person B is, this is where person C is, and then he asks for direct updates. So it's very, very important that there be rabita for those people who are serious about making progress on this path. There's no other way around it. One, you have to do the work, and then two, you have to give updates as to how much work you've completed. It's kind of straightforward. It would be like that in anything else that you would do in real life. Anything in life is like that. You have to do the work, and then you have to update the person that you did the work, right? Same thing in class. You can't just do your homework and put it in your backpack. You have to turn it in, and it has to be graded. So it's the exact same thing in this matter as well. So two things. Number one, increase our dhikr. And make a regular routine of dhikr, of muraqabah in particular. And then number two, be regular in your updates. You have to come and you have to say, this is the amount of time I'm doing my dhikr. This is the lesson I'm currently doing. This is what I experience when I do my muraqabah. This is my current state. This is my schedule. I do muraqabah at this particular time. And there's two benefits to that. One, it allows me to know what's going on so that I can then update Shaykh Zulfiqar. And two, sometimes there might be a way to improve your schedule. There might be something within the schedule that can be changed, that can be altered in order to allow you to progress at a more rapid rate. And so that would come out as well in that type of discussion. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to be among those who are able to achieve the end of this journey. May He give us the tawfiq to have depth in dhikr, and may He give us the tawfiq to be among those who are always in touch with our elders. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.